and welcome to Cinema Spectator, a show where an expert and a casual movie fan explore the cinematic canon across many different films. Today's film is called The Florida Project. I am the casual, and I'm joined, of course, as always, with the expert, Cameron Tuttle. What's going on, Cameron?
Oh, nothing much. We are. It's fun. We're doing an afternoon recording today. We've been doing a lot of mornings actually recently, which maybe you can see on video. You know, when our eyes are.
Well, you can tell it's the
all-
afternoon if you're watching the video because I'm all sweaty. For some reason, South Bay area gets pretty warm in the summer. You're in lucky foggy land up in San Francisco, so you're blessed.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. I do like the role reversal we just did there, but I'm not going to shill for you, so you can still do that part. But I do want to just intro the movie just a little bit. So obviously, The Florida Project, kind of an interesting choice. Obviously, it was your choice this week because I kind of gave you the reins for that.
Yeah, do you want to give some context about what we're doing this month and why we're doing this episode and flipping roles a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, we've been doing this for a year now, so we are kind of taking a look back in terms of our just our journey and in terms of like where you stand in where you stand in sort of learning about films and doing this more and more. So I think it's an interesting experiment to kind of go back and have you introduce me to some films that maybe I haven't seen, or even, I don't know what your plan is next week, but even doing something that maybe we both have seen and sort of talking about sort of maybe how your perspective has changed on that, going forward. So we're just kind of just doing it as a look back on where we've come from. And I think this was a really good choice, specifically because I think it's a very, it's in some ways it's an unusual film, but it's also one that's very quintessentially sort of indie and quintessentially maybe artistic. And it's one that you had seen before that sort of was that I had missed, but you had really connected with. So yeah, I think it's a good choice to talk about for sure.
Yeah, it will be fun to discuss kind of why I picked this movie with the context of the last two episodes, talking about what movies resonated with me from the ones that you picked over the last year, and also talking about which ones didn't. And I think if you haven't listened to those last two episodes, a lot of our conversation around this movie, or at least a portion of it, is going to be a review, but also a reflection of those last two conversations. I'm excited to discuss why I chose this and how this movie has been in the back of my mind when you were showing me all these great classics and considering this one. I watched this about towards the beginning of when we started doing this show. So I've been really surprised that you haven't seen this movie, and to me it's like that staple. I love what you said, quintessentially indie or artistic. Like, this movie is just booming with that we're an indie artsy movie. So I
for sure
I look to this film in a lot of different ways. I'm sure it's pulling from many different inspirations, but I'm excited to hear your take on it. Excited to talk about how I feel about this film on a second viewing, and also reflecting on some of the movies that we've watched in this past year. This is Cinema Spectator. We've already introed the show. You can support us at patreon.com/ECFS Productions. Throw a couple dollars our way, get exclusive benefits, all this good stuff. So you can get a question read on air, support the show as a producer, get the bonus episode each month. If you don't have a few dollars, it's all good. You can give us a rating on iTunes and tell friends and family. That is how the show grows. I'm done shilling for now. Cameron, I really just want to jump into it. We can start talking about the Florida Project, unless you want to talk about other things you've been watching this week, but I've been pretty busy, so.
Well, I just started Fargo last night, actually. So I don't have a clear opinion of that TV show. I've seen you've seen the movie, right?
Yeah, I saw it in this past year too.
Yeah. So I've seen the movie too, obviously, but this I hadn't really been on board for the TV show, so I just started it yesterday, and I'm like one episode in, so I don't have an opinion yet. But yeah, I'll let you know my thoughts once I get deeper into it. But other than that, honestly, I've been really busy too, so I kind of haven't really watched anything. Oh, did I tell you? It might have been last week or the week before. I rewatched a movie called Memories of Murder.
Mm.
It's a Korean film by Bong Joon-ho, the guy who made Parasite.
I remember you mentioning it, I think.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, fantastic movie. It's so good. Yeah, I really, really love him and his work. I think we at some point should do a deep dive on sort of his films or just sort of Korean new wave movies in general. Yeah, they're really interesting to me in kind of a similar way to that this movie is actually. Similar but different.
You mentioned he did Parasite. Is this the same guy that did Snowpiercer?
Yes.
I think I brought this up earlier when you brought this movie up, maybe like a few weeks ago or a week ago or something. But like I saw this comparison on YouTube about how Snowpiercer is like a sequel to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Do you remember me talking about this?
I think I've heard that before.
It's crazy.
I've seen the video thumbnail, but
yes,
I haven't watched that video.
You should. If you guys are interested in hearing more about Snowpiercer and comparing it to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory,
I love that movie, by the way.
It was just like watching it. It's crazy. This guy has just this wild theory about it. So look that up on YouTube. Now that I've sat down, just because I've been rushing to get here, I did watch some stuff this week. So I'll say it. I went to the theaters and watched Black Widow, which was generic as you could imagine. I really do not have much to say about this movie. I think that it is enjoyable. It is so surface level. There's not really anything that is like valuable about it, and it really feels like it feels so stakeless is probably the best way of putting it, because it's like she's not gonna die, when she dies,
Sure,
like it happens. This movie is like way behind when it should have been released, is basically how it feels.
Well, technically it was. I think it was supposed to be released like many years ago. I think they did the filming for this movie in like 2018 or something. Like,
yeah,
it's old, like you can tell for sure.
There's also a lot of like Fast and Furious moments in this movie where people stand right next to grenades or like explode like jet engines right by their face, and they're just like barely touched by the it's very odd, because none of the characters in this movie seem to have any sort of superhuman strength. It's supposed to be more like Mission Impossible, but there's just no concern about people experiencing fatal injury, like they're just completely invincible. So I just found it to be very drab and boring. I've heard some interesting things about the new Suicide Squad by James Gunn, but I have not seen it yet. And I watched the first like 20 minutes of Alien in 4K. It's remastered on Amazon Prime right now. You can watch the remastered version. Just an incredible movie. So atmospheric. Totally worth watching. I gotta go back and finish it all the way. I actually might watch the rest of it tonight. That sounds really nice. So we got to get on with this. It's time to talk about the Florida Project. Cameron, is there any context that you wanted to add to your earlier intro?
Yeah, just as a note, I mean, I guess the biggest thing that we could talk about is Sean Baker as kind of a filmmaker, where he comes from. Started off in NYU. He went to Tisch. He had some talent probably from the get-go. Although you can tell throughout his filmmaking style, he's never really left those independent, small budget roots, so he made a couple of features that really didn't get wide release, but were primarily in sort of the festival circuit, South by Southwest and smaller festivals like that. And then he made Tangerine in, I believe, 2016, which was kind of his first breakout movie. That was the one that a lot of people started talking about. It is still a very, very small budget movie. In fact, I would consider it to be like a shoestring budget movie or a micro budget. and famously about it is it's shot on an iPhone 5. So it's like one of those movies that's kind of in some ways a time capsule more than a lot of movies get to be considered, specifically because it's using a lot of non-actors and things like that. And he's carried that style throughout today. And his newest film is did premiere at Cannes. It's called Red Rocket. It doesn't have a release date in the U.S. Right now, but pretty notable. It was officially selected for Cannes, and but I didn't find any information about that budget. But I assume, just knowing his track record, it's probably pretty small. He's definitely still working with non-actors or non-large actors. And yeah, that's kind of where he comes from. Definitely, like I said, the indie, small budget, real world actors, set where it's set, almost trying to blur the line of documentary and fiction filmmaking. So I think that gives us kind of the perfect introduction into what this film kind of is all about. And in some ways, I think it's completely inseparable from the I guess like the meaning and the authenticity of this film is really completely inseparable from its placement as a small budget, almost pseudo documentary style movie that has elements of real world, real life implications. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting movie from that context, but that's sort of just, I guess there's a couple moments in the movie that had me looking a little bit behind the curtain. Not that it took me out necessarily, but had me be like, oh yeah, you could kind of tell that's like for real,
Yeah.
Specifically, this isn't really a spoiler, I guess, but specifically the sequences where she's selling perfume,
Right.
like I knew like right away that was real interactions. I know, and it was.
Yeah.
That was a real, they were really doing that, which is very interesting.
It is crazy. It's very crazy, actually. Yeah. This film follows sort of the underbelly of Florida outside of Disney World, and you're sort of witnessing the world through a young girl's eyes who lives at a motel, which is illegal, right? So it's people in extreme poverty renting out these motel rooms as a place to live, as the motel is being upkept and sort of facelifted by Willem Dafoe's character, who's the property manager. And the young girl has a mother that's pretty rough around the edges, who's definitely one of those non-actor types. She as an actress has a lot of interesting interviews, and she's been, like people really like her in this film, and she comes with an authenticity because the way she acts is, related to the world that she comes from. And so I think there's something powerful about that. But you're kind of witnessing drama unfold as this motel is trying to be lifted up out of poverty to become some sort of profitable establishment, and sort of the conflict that comes with the tenants who are living there, and also the respect and love that the tenants have for the property manager. It's like this tension and whatnot. And Willem Dafoe is fantastic in this movie, I think. So yeah, that kind of covers the plot. I think the main reason I wanted to bring this movie forward for discussion, and we can get into the details and the things we liked, and I'd love to hear your full take on sort of how you see this film and consider it and the cinematic canon, if this is one that people should watch and all that. But the reason this movie really stuck with me is because I think it balances a lot of the things that I love about cinema, and it also does things that I shouldn't like, and shows me how they can be effective and powerful in a movie, right? This film spends a lot of time lingering and letting you be stuck in a setting for just the perfect amount of time. It uses boredom so specifically and effectively, and it it's seen through the eyes of a child. So that's what like makes it even better. I don't know if you knew this, Cameron. You probably picked up on it pretty quick, but this movie has essentially no music in it at all,
Hmm. Yeah.
which is already
Just the opening and closing credits.
yeah. It's sort of like for me, like, why would you remove something like music from a movie, right?
Mhm.
Like, I absolutely love scores and soundtracks and things like that, but it just it is done with so much effect. Watching it the second time, I didn't even realize, like, it opens with the song "Celebrate," which is such a happy, exciting song, very like goofy almost for an opening, and then the ending having like this, bootleg stock music Disney score, to sort of, coincide with, this world existing outside of Disney World. Um, I just think it grounds the movie. It gives it like this realism, and yeah, I mean, as our conversation was going last week, right? Like the things that disconnected me are like, you know, there's almost like an excessive amount of drama that you don't care about, right? And this movie has so much drama for little things that don't really matter, and you're almost confused by why you're even witnessing some of this stuff, but for some reason it works and you're drawn into it, right? The boredom elements are colorful, the cinematography is beautiful, so when you're bored you're just drawn in with like eye candy. And the boredom is also used as a plot device for the kids experience of like not knowing really what to do and trying to have fun amongst all this, like, I mean, in a sense, like a level of depression, right, that's being pressed down on these people. And yeah, I just found that like, and like the artsiness, right? Like this movie kind of has um like a stigma with the way it's shot and the way that it just looks like an indie art movie. I don't know, like it's kind of almost obnoxious, but the presentation is just so awesome. Like I can't even like I don't know why I'm drawn to it. I think there's a part of it where it's like it's this, cinephile beauty, but then it's like mixed with actors and actresses who are clearly not perfect, but they're also authentic and real, and it just comes through in a way that's like you mesh like this snootiness with like this real, like almost like a door into reality, and
Mhm.
it's a very unique blend that I think really stuck with me. So I want to know, Cameron, like what do you think of this film? Because I was so excited to show it to you.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good choice on your part. I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was insightful in a few ways. One, I love the perspective. I think it's probably the best thing that the movie does is it really engrosses you in the perspective of being a 6-year-old Mooney, being someone who is sort of on the margins, but in a way very unaware, very very naive, and it gives you just enough context or just enough, you mentioned there's a lot of drama. I don't even think that that's necessarily true. A lot of the drama I think is kind of behind the curtain in a lot of ways, and I think intentionally so, because obviously, as we follow Mooney, she's not being exposed to as much of sort of the, what's really going on, as we happen to know, just from our own context or our own understanding of what's actually going on, and there that is probably what kept me most engaged throughout the movie, is sort of um, you're getting a bit of the behind the scenes, but really, it's every now and then where there will be sort of this tear in the curtain where you can kind of peek through. But that's just enough for you to understand what's really going on and understand sort of how bad these people really have it and how bad, things are in the situation. And in a lot of ways, obviously I think Mooney, there's a there's a real uh I would say they took a real gamble in making a movie about a 6-year-old who's um extremely can be extremely annoying, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
They took a real gamble on that, and I think it really worked out in a lot of ways. Even, moments where you do find her incredibly annoying or incredibly like irritating, you always get back to the point of how sort of innocent and charming she is, and how fun it is to see sort of this world through her eyes. And in some ways you obviously don't blame her, which I think makes her even more of a sympathetic character. You don't blame her for what's going on, because in a lot of ways, obviously it's not her fault the way that, that she's the way that she is. And even then, I think I don't know what it is, but I think there was a real chance that she could have been just extremely irritating throughout the whole movie, and she wasn't.
Yeah.
Which is very good. Obviously, I think child actors oftentimes get a really bad rap. Usually, like for a good reason, but
Yeah.
I think she is a really good example of a child actor who like nailed it. Because kids like her, and I think partially because a lot of this movie was improvised. A lot of this movie was sort of capturing the children playing and going about their day in an authentic way, and that's kind of what makes it understandable. There's no scenes where she's having like a whiny conversation to her mom about like oh, why is our life so bad, which like could totally be like the thing that you would do in this movie. But yeah, there's nothing like that. It's really, it feels authentic. She feels like a real person, even though almost, you in a lot of ways you feel like Bobby, or at least I did.
Yeah.
I think I identified with him probably the most out of anyone. Although in some ways, he has his own faults in that I think he's not really, he's a little bit spineless in the movie, in some ways. Like you almost want him to put his foot down in a lot of these situations.
Yeah. Well, Bobby is a very complex character, and I think I struggle saying this because I haven't seen Willem Dafoe in a lot of things. He is just one of my favorite actors to watch on screen. Whenever he's in something, he just kind of steals the show. But I think that in this movie, he doesn't like go completely crazy in any sort of manner. He usually has a way of having that like Nicolas Cage moment in movies. And this film, you can tell he's really calculated in the way that he approaches scenes, and he is sympathetic because there are moments where, like, if you've watched kids, they drive you nuts, and he is like irritated by them, but also like he's experiencing what the audience is experiencing with them, where they're like, these kids are breaking the rules, but you can't really, you don't know what to do with them because obviously they don't know any better, right?
And he obviously cares for them.
Yeah.
I think in his mind, it's not his place to do anything necessarily, but he also doesn't want, he doesn't want them to be out on the street, and he doesn't want them to there's that amazing sequence with the guy who's coming up and talking to them.
Yeah.
And that sequence is full of just complete tension, and you don't even see the lead up to that
Yeah.
it just kind of happens. Um, and
Well,
it's such a brilliant performance on his part.
I remember that scene, and I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but if you've seen the movie, you know what scene we're talking about. The second viewing, it wasn't as effective, I will say. But on the first viewing, like that moment was like, again, like one of those moments where the curtain breaks for a second from the
Mm.
childish, fun view of this, colorful, wacky Florida, you know, back alley, right? Suddenly you see all kind of the ugliness, and there's constant moments of you seeing it with, the car fight, the scene where they're like running over people in the parking lot,
Yeah, yeah,
um but the scene in particular where the man tries to walk up to the children, that scene is like, oh my goodness, like it it really grips you. I don't know what it is, but that scene is just super effective. And you do see moments where Bobby's character, like he does have a line. There's like a line that
yeah,
is too
for
far.
sure,
That
for
is
sure.
one of the scenes. The scene where, the Mooney and his and her mother, they have to move out, and he's trying to pay for their rent, even though like he really has no place to be doing that. Like it's almost like he can't do everything for them, but he doesn't want them on the street, and he doesn't want them hurt by other people, right?
Yeah.
So he's a fantastic character. Let's talk about Mooney's mother for a little
Mm.
bit. I'm kind of curious to know what you think of her, because I think she has really awesome moments, and also she is not a very likable character. So I think it's a very
Yeah,
difficult role to approach, because she is kind of slimy and
definitely. Yeah.
irresponsible,
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Well, it's funny because a lot of I was just reading some reviews, some critics' reviews of this movie, and it's talking a lot about sort of how hard it is on the margins, and how hard it is on the edge of life and society. I think this movie is a bit more critical than that, though, in a lot of ways, because I think a lot of the responsibility is placed on Haley as a character, as a mother, and she's seen repeatedly getting herself into poorer and poorer situations. Um, you know, it does have sympathy for her, of course. It has sympathy for her in the fact that her explanation um, for getting fired from her job is, she refused to have sex with one of the patrons. That was what she said in the job. She was in like a recruitment center or whatever. And so, there is sympathy for her in that situation, but you kind of see her make really bad decisions over and over again, and the consequences end up being her children and the other people around her. And in some ways she does keep on getting away with bad things. Obviously the end, there's a little bit of chickens coming home to roost, but there's definitely, throughout the movie she's kind of seen getting a pass in a lot of ways. And I found her character to be maybe the most I don't want to say complex, but I think maybe the most sort of yeah, I mean maybe the most complex character in the movie, because you can tell that she is given a lot of sympathy throughout the movie, but she's also judged very harshly.
Yeah.
And she's a character who has probably the worst outcome of the entire movie. Maybe Mooney as well, but she's given sort of the hardest treatment in the end, and it's it's very tough to watch, even though you're kind of on the side of she's a bad person and a
Yeah.
bad parent,
Yeah.
but it's still very devastating, when that eventuality happens, because there's a real there's a sense that it's almost that it's even worse because she had the opportunity to do things better.
Yeah.
Like it's almost more of a tragedy because there was things that she could have done to stop what happened. And yeah, that I think that's, I don't know, that's kind of the toughest aspect of the movie to grapple with, and it's the one that I think I've been left with the most of the movie. Is just there's a depth to her character that was very real in the way that people and love, they often find themselves making the same mistakes over and over again. And I think she's a prime example of that, sort of in its maybe most extreme. But
Yeah, I think what surprised me about sort of the critique of most of the characters is that the children are innocent because they're children. Even though they do terrible things, it's almost like they have a pass, right? And with the mother character, I think what's hard is watching things catch up with her, and then also the filmmakers having the maturity to say, yes, there needs to be some sort of call for her responsibility, and she never seems to pick that up. But I found it so nuanced where they continually were like, no one wins, it's all again, right? Like you mentioned tragedy. I think that this is a great example of a modern tragedy. And I'm not even drawn to movies that are tragedies, but this one has so much life and reality put in it, like so much truth in it, I think.
Yeah.
And right when you think it's about time for her to shape up, right, there's still just, I don't know, it's like there's no winners. Like they're like, oh, we're trying to make the people that show up child services or child support or whatever, they're like, we're trying to make things better, and they're not making things better at all. And so I don't know, I really want to get into the conclusion of this film. It's probably the one thing that people talk the most about on the internet about this movie, but I don't really want to spoil it because I do think that this movie is worth watching. Cameron, do you want to slap a rating on this movie?
Yeah, no, I think I don't know if this movie is for everybody, because it's very, I would say it's tragic in a way that I don't know if a lot of people are ready for, I guess. It's a very uncomfortable movie in a lot of ways. So, I would say maybe it's a step above for everybody, but I would say generally, I think anybody can go into this movie and pull something out of it. Obviously, you just have to kind of be ready for something that's genuinely upsetting.
Yeah, I found that the intro of this movie creates a juxtaposition for the entire thing, right? To start with that song, Celebrate Good Times, right? And it's so fun and everything's so colorful. And then to constantly be exposed to the criminal underbelly or the depression that these people are experiencing. It's just wow. I don't know. It really pulls you in weird directions, and I'm not for watching movies that make you super uncomfortable, but I think this movie is done so tastefully where it's that experimental food that is worth trying at least once, and it's not like for instance, I had duck once and I was like, you know what? I'm willing to try duck if it's at a 4-star restaurant and I know that it's like it says next to it like chef's choice or whatever, right?
I love duck.
Yeah, but like I wasn't so sure about trying it at like a 2-star restaurant where it's on the bottom of the menu, you know? This feels like duck at a very high-end restaurant, you know, where you're like, I'm willing to give it a shot and it's going to be a unique experience that is worth your time. I really do think this movie is worth your time, but I do agree it is a difficult film to get through. I watched it again with Juliana, and she said, I don't really want to watch this movie again because it's so sad, but we watched the entire thing together, and she was honestly kind of glued to it. And it's rare for her to be bought into a movie, especially a second time too.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of speaks to it. I think
before we do get into sort of full spoiler territory, I
Yeah.
would want to say one other thing. I think it's clear and obvious that this movie is styled in a lot of ways after sort of Italian neorealism. Just to give you a kind of deep dive on maybe the roots of this movie. It was, and it's funny because we actually talked about this a little bit in our Westerns month because if you remember, Leone started on epics and neorealist movies in Italy. So neorealism was a style directly post World War II that sort of centered around the changes in life in Italy after the end of Mussolini's reign, and the big thing that it did was it gave sort of it was almost pseudo documentary style, real people, non-actors, very low budget, obviously because there wasn't a lot of money in Italy after World War II, and it had sort of the trappings of being centered around total sort of poverty, total depravity in the same way that this movie kind of is. And I think it's obvious that this is a clear callback to that sort of style. Now, I don't think we're going to get too deep into it onto this show because it's not necessarily my favorite style to watch. I think Bicycle Thieves is kind of overrated, sorry to any fans.
I don't even know what you're talking about, so.
Yeah, I know it's a big deal, but whatever. But I think it's clear that Baker is probably a fan of these movies and is a fan of this genre because it's almost the American version of neorealist films. So I just wanted to mention that because it's really interesting to see sort of these older concepts come back into new, smaller budget movies. And I think I don't want to say it's one of the reasons that you or I are interested in this movie necessarily, but it is one that I think you can see the appeal of having these lower budget non-actors, having sort of trying to make the most authentic movie possible, which is obviously, it's not possible to make a 100% authentic movie, but doing this in sort of the smallest localized area as possible. I think this is a really great example of that. So I just wanted to mention that.
And one more thing before we get into the spoilers of the ending and discussing possible meanings and all that. I cannot stress it. This is one of the most beautiful movies I've ever watched. I really think that there are so many scenes in this that just have your eyes just like, wow, where are we? Like what is even going on, And Juliana has been to Florida and she was like, Isaac, you hate it because it looks just like this, And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of tacky. It's very strange, but
it does look like that. Yes. I've also been to Florida.
Yeah. The scenes with like, Orange World or like the gift shop with the massive wizard man or the ice cream shop and the all the scenes with the helicopter flying or those amazing, like I don't know if they're like track shots or handheld gimbal shots or something that where the kids are running up the driveway to the motel. There's like that very like pink purple building and the kids are like it's like an over the shoulder. I'm like, dude, this movie is just phenomenal looking. The shot that sticks with me that I am just I have never, I just, man, it's flawless to me. It's like one of the most flawless shots I've seen in movies to this day. Is there's a scene where Willem Dafoe walks out at like in the evening time, and he like lights his cigarette, and all of the hotel lights turn on
Yeah,
around him.
I love that shot.
That scene, I'm like, it's perfection. I don't even know what's going, like, it doesn't even matter what's going on, but it's just, oh, ooh, that's cinematic 101, you know?
Yeah. I love the scene with the rainbow, that they were, they apparently they were supposed to do that in post. It was supposed to be, an effect, but one day there was a rainstorm and they ran out and got this shot. So yeah, there's little bits of magic and all throughout, sort of sprinkled throughout the movie. I totally agree.
And to watch this movie after Black Widow too, like, can I just say that, like, to have actors and actresses in a place that is real cannot be it just cannot be emulated. I'm getting so tired of some of like those CGI backgrounds. I mean, like, you watch The Mandalorian, right? And it's beautiful looking. That show is great, but it's all shot in one room, and there's nothing, like, there's almost like this effect where you know that it's not real, even though it looks so good. There's just something not quite. But it just doesn't feel like this movie feels, where you're there. Yeah. I think about, like, what if you shot something, or if you made a movie yourself in your own neighborhood, or in a place that you knew really well, and the things that you would show the audience that are memorable to you just come alive so much more than, like, well, we're like let's say you're filming in San Francisco, like, well, we got to film by Coit Tower, because that's a landmark. When in reality, there's a street that you walk down in San Francisco that is way more memorable to you because you've spent time there,
Yeah, it's actually interesting you mentioned that, because there's a movie that kind of reminds me of, like, a not as good version of this. It's called Last Black Man in San Francisco, but it's very much like that, where it shows, like, the back of 280 and, like, and Bayview and, like, places where you're like, is this shot in San Francisco? And yes, it is. If you know it, you know where it is. But it's in the same. It has the same feeling of this movie, where it's obviously not trying to glamorize certain elements of things, but it finds beauty in sort of the smallest elements. So
I would say a good balance, if you're trying to understand what we're talking about, is, and this does have a little bit of a glorified perspective, but the opening of Nightcrawler, where they show different areas in Los Angeles, like, those are landmarks, but there's also sections, like small roads that zigzag left and right, that if you've been there, you're like, oh my gosh, like, I know that road, I know those areas. So that, I would say that's more of a landmark based one, but it still kind of follows in the same vein. Okay, Cameron, talk to me about the ending, because it's whack, and I really hated it the first time I saw it. I was very excited to watch it again after reading some things about the ending.
Yeah, did your opinion change? I am interested in hearing that.
Well, so the first time I watched it, I was just confused because I was so invested in the drama. In that final scene where Mooney goes to, like, tell her friend that she's leaving, is like, I don't know, like, it is very emotional. I can't even, like, that scene is one of the most difficult scenes of in the movie, because she's a kid. She's trying to explain something that's so messed up, and she
doesn't understand fully. She has no concept of what's happening, other than the implications of what's happening. Yeah. Right.
And so it's super sad, and it moves you in a way that is I don't know, like, it's genuinely one of those scenes in a movie that, like, it earns any sort of emotional response. I think it's just, it's hard to watch innocent kids be so upset about something that isn't a stupid toy or their ice cream falling, or it's like they're being separated from their parents. Like, geez, that's just very hard to grasp. So you're put through this, like, emotional blender when suddenly the first, like, song, or the second song in the movie, emerges, and the camera shifts from this beautiful cinematic camera to an iPhone, and everything looks like garbage. There's this really weird music, and they're just running across areas that you've seen through the movie into new areas that you haven't seen, and then all of a sudden they're in Disney World, right? And the movie just ends when they're in the park. And I found this to be a very artsy film person ending, and I was just confused, and I had to go look up stuff to understand it and kind of get over my frustration, I think, with the change. But now that I kind of have learned a little bit more about the director and sort of his last project with Tangerine, which I haven't been able to watch. I think I tried to start it once and I just was not grabbing me the same way that this movie did. It's kind of neat to have this sort of swept away, like, I don't know, because it doesn't really, I don't know exactly what it's trying to say, but it's almost like you could interpret this ending as so many different like things. Like the two interpretations that stick with me are like, you know, children have this invincibility in the hardest situations where they are like, you know, just so joyful that they're gonna be able to rally together and move on or something like that. And then the second interpretation is look at all this terribleness and then it's all okay because Disney World is in the backyard, you know? Like that's like this very like cynical, almost like the forgotten people.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that that's what I took from it. I don't think that montage actually happened in sort of the context of the movie. And I actually think the perspective shift is a key indicator of that. One of the things I guess that's a clue to me, at least, is because I do agree with you. I think this ending is sort of to be interpreted by the audience. I don't think there is necessarily a clear ending. So I'm not going to say like I'm right or whatever, but the shift in sort of, as you said, it shifts to an iPhone camera, and that shift actually happens when Jancy, puts her hand out and takes her hand and sort of runs with her away. And one of the things that obviously there was a production element behind why this was shot on an iPhone. It was because they shot it in Disneyland Disney World without their permission, So There was a production element to that. They obviously did not have the budget to get a film crew in Disneyland, but the other element of it is I think obviously it's clear that it wasn't just, it didn't shift to the iPhone footage right when they get to Disneyland, which maybe you would expect if this actually did happen in sort of the context of the movie. But I think there's a cue in that this is sort of this is like the dreamy, happy perspective of what of what a 6-year-old might think would be like the best outcome in this situation. You know what I mean? Like this is the happy ending that that Mooney would want. She wants someone to take her hand and run away to Disneyland. And obviously that's not what's happening, and obviously that's not what is going to happen. But we see that because our perspective is with Mooney. We see that because that's her wish. She wants to just be swept away and forget about this, sort of sad moment. And I think you can see that there's a bit of I don't know. There's clues in that sequence that make me think that it's all sort of it's at the very least in sort of Mooney's head.
Well, I think it's like what I was saying with my first interpretation, I think it kind of follows along with what you're saying, but I think you articulated it much better than I did. There's a longing or a dreaminess about um like escaping from it all, and
Mm.
I think you're right when you're saying that the filmmaker's trying to have you step into the imagination and the perspective of Mooney and her desires. I think for me, I was too focused on the audience's like experience, whether it's almost like we're with her on that, you know? It's almost what we would prefer, except it does it. You're right, where you're saying like, no, this is the best possible outcome that Mooney's head could think of, when our heads are like, no, this is just weird, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I think that's why I was confused, because I was like, I like the sentiment and the joy, right? But I don't feel satisfied at all for the realities, right?
Hmm.
And it's clearly trying to disconnect you from reality with the introduction of music and a different iPhone perspective
Yeah,
and a
yeah.
guerrilla filmmaking, all mixed into like the ending, which I think is super awesome. Like I also think that like the ending, although I was negative on it at first, it mixes all these elements with the introduction of music, the introduction of like garbage budget equipment, and like running into a park when you're not supposed to be there. Like I loved watching on my second viewing all the faces that were looking at this guy chasing two children with an iPhone. You
Yeah,
know, there's a ton of people like, what's happening here? You know,
yeah,
but it's
yeah.
not that weird. Everybody's like, oh, they're in Disneyland. He's gonna film his kids, you know, or whatever. So I just
Well,
think
there, I think there's like a bunch of them who were there, because it wasn't like, obviously it was a skeleton crew, but like they had to have both of the actresses handlers, the director, the DP. So it's like, you can imagine that there's like kind of this bigger crowd all following these two kids like running. You know?
I don't know. I kind of hope that it was just like one guy and they're like, okay, girls, we're outside the park. What you're going to do is when we get in, you're going to just run till you see the castle, you know? So I don't know. I don't know how they did it, but it's a very unique ending. And I just think, I don't know if this is a movie that I consider being like, oh, this is like a movie for everyone. Like, am I going to put this next to The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, or you know, um, the Great Dictator or something like that? Probably not. But what this movie did do for me was like it resonated with all of its weirdness, with all of its quirks and its unique filmmaking. Like it just was able to stick with me in a very like powerful way. I think there is the thing that I considered with this movie when analyzing the films that I did like a lot. There's a desire for saying something almost like truthful or real, even if it is from a different perspective than your own, right? Like one of the things I love about The Apartment is like almost the hard moral standard that it places. And it's like,
Mhm.
I'm going to speak a truth in your life that's going to transcend this movie, right? The Great Dictator's final speech is also a hard moral truth that comes from someone's perspective, right? Um, I would say the Good, the Bad, the Ugly has all this stylistic stuff, but there's this underpinning layer of commentary around war and sort of the I don't know. There's just like consideration for morality and justice, and they're like these big high end concepts that are so difficult to even discuss. They're philosophers who have studied it for years, and some of these movies, I think, what really excites me about them, and where I think they just go into this section that we call the cinematic canon on this show. We obviously aren't following any sort of real bracket or anything. I know Cameron's coming from, I guess, more of a educational perspective. But for me personally, I'm like, what makes this movie come through is like there's just so much reality and truth in it it just goes beyond the movie, I think. And that's like what I'm in for if you're going to make me sit through boring movies or weird movies or strange things. Like if you're gonna make me endure some level of filmmaking, like do it like this is kind of how I'm saying, like where it's like it's a reward for your time. It isn't a disrespect of your time. I think that's really like how I feel about the more I watch some of these other movies and whatnot. So what do you think, Cameron? Is my perspective making sense when showing you this film, or?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I guess just about the ending, like, I, I think there's something, um, I kind of agree. There's this pulling towards something truthful, in a way, even though obviously the ending is sort of hyper stylized, in contrast to the rest of the movie, which is why I think it's effective, actually. But the truthful element is that there, like you said, there are no winners in this situation.
Yeah.
Everybody loses, and it's tough to watch that, I guess, and not be impacted or not be affected by it. And I think there's, I think what you're saying is really is so accurate. Like, there's a truth to this movie. It's like picking at something, you know, to where it's trying to determine, what is true. And I think it does a really great job. And I agree that's sort of what makes this movie worthwhile in a lot of ways. I understand. I guess I totally see that perspective. What I will say, though, is there are movies that I think, maybe, I don't want to say like don't touch on something true, but there are examples of great movies in my mind that deal with something that isn't quite so deep or quite so profound, that are still just as impactful, or still just as sort of meaningful in a lot of ways. So I wouldn't say necessarily my entire perspective is that, like, we have to look towards sort of the deep, meaningful issues or the deep, impactful stories or whatever.
No, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think what I was really trying to itch at is like when a film, like diverts into territory that is almost counter entertainment, I think is sort of, because like movies are like supposed to be entertaining in some way, right?
Yeah.
When they're deferring that, right? When they're beginning to explore stuff that is either, difficult to watch, or it's designed or created in a way that is so like unique that it is off-putting or something like that. There needs to be a reason, and I find that films don't need to go that far, but when they do and they have like the impact that this film has, it's worth it,
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah,
where I'm like,
totally.
it's worth it, because I enjoy like fun movies that I think are designed incredibly well and they're worth watching. I mean, like, I don't know why I'm thinking of like Hot Fuzz by Edgar Wright. That's all like, that's just, you're there for the entertainment and it's totally worth it. It's a great time to watch that movie. But I think as we looked at the movies that didn't resonate with me, so much of my longing with those films was like, what was the payoff? Like, why was I not connecting with this movie? It felt like it was wasting my time. It felt like it was, almost out to get me as a casual viewer, right? And I would rather like have a filmmaker who's like, sure, I'm going to push you, I'm going to make you uncomfortable, but I'm also going to make it worth your while, And I'm like, that is what I want to see more of. That's why I picked this movie for us to watch. So.
Definitely.
Anything else you want to add before we wrap up, Cameron? It's been about an hour. It's been fun talking about this movie. I think you want me to pick a couple more movies this month, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we just have one more, right? Is that true?
I think so. Maybe
No, we have two more.
two more. Yeah.
So we can, I mean, just pick for the next week, and then we'll see after that. Do you have any thoughts about what you want to do next?
Well, I can either take you into the complete opposite of this movie, which is just the most disgusting form of entertainment gluttony. Or we can try to continue this theme of like movies that I think of that kind of fit this, idea that's prancing into the artistic, but also like somehow I think should or will connect with a casual viewer, right? So I need to think about it. Maybe I'll post on Instagram what I end up picking for by the time you hear this, you'll see. But I have to decide. I didn't realize I was going to do another week. So, what do you think, Cameron? You want disgusting entertainment gluttony or something more profound?
I'm happy with anything.
Okay, maybe for the commentary track we'll do something weird.
Okay,
all right,
I like that.
Okay, all right, Cameron. It's always been a pleasure. Thanks for being the co-host for this one. And
thanks for taking the reins.
Yeah, of course. All right, thank you guys for supporting the show. We will see you next week. Cinema Spectator is an ECFS Productions podcast that is fully funded on Patreon.com. Shout out to our producers, Darren O'Neill and Tim Smith, for supporting the show, and to the rest of you that support us at patreon.com/ECFS Productions. If you want to learn more about the benefits you can get, check out our Patreon. The show cannot happen without you great listeners, so we thank you for all your kindness and support.